The morning I turned 17, my stepfather handed me three things: a rusted iron key, a yellow deed to a workshop I'd never heard of, and a one-way bus ticket to a town called Hollow Ridge, Vermont. No cake. No candles. No happy birthday, Iris. Just a duffel bag by the door, and a look on his face that said, "You don't live here anymore." I was 17 years old, with $87 in my pocket, and a workshop that had been sealed shut since 1981. 45 years. Nobody had opened that door since, before my mother was even born. I thought it was junk. I thought Gerald was punishing me for something I couldn't remember doing. I was wrong. Inside that workshop, behind a loose floorboard, I found a letter from a grandfather I never met, a man my whole family called a failure. A man who disappeared from history on purpose. And what he'd left behind, hidden in the dark for 45 years, didn't just change my life. It changed everything I thought I knew about my mother's death. About the town I'd been dropped into. About the woman baking bread across the street, who looked at me like she'd been waiting her whole life. If you've ever been given something that looked like a burden and turned out to be a gift, stay with me. This is that story.
Gerald Morris was not a cruel man. That's the thing people always get wrong about this story. He wasn't the villain from a fairy tale. He didn't yell. He didn't strike. He just stopped seeing me the day my mother died, and by the time I turned 17, he'd finished the paperwork on that erasure. I stood in the front hallway of the only house I'd ever known. Wallpaper my mother picked out when I was 4. The little chip in the doorframe, where I'd measured my height every summer. The umbrella stand she loved, because it had roses painted on it, even though the roses were faded now, almost gone. Gerald cleared his throat. "There's a lawyer's letter in the envelope," he said. "It explains the property." "What property?" "Your grandfather's." I stared at him. "I don't have a grandfather." "You do." "You did. On your mother's side." Because my mother had told me 100 times, 1,000 times, that her father had died before I was born. And her mother had died soon after. And there was no one left on her side. No one. Just her. Just us. Until she was gone too. And then it was just me and Gerald, staring at each other across a kitchen table for 9 years, while grief hardened into something neither of us could name. "Gerald," I said. My voice was very small. "Please." He looked away. "The bus leaves at 9:40, he said. "I already called a cab." That was it. That was the whole conversation. My body was very quiet. My hands were very steady. I picked up the duffel bag. I picked up the envelope. I put the iron key in the front pocket of my jacket, next to the small leather notebook my mother had kept, the one I'd taken from her nightstand the day she died, and never let out of my sight since. At the door, I turned back. "Did you ever love me?" Gerald did not answer. He just closed the door. The cab driver was an older man, with a kind face, and a radio playing soft country music. He looked at me in the mirror, and asked if I was okay. "I'm fine," I said. "Just a bus trip." "Long one?" "Vermont." "Vacation?" I almost laughed. "Something like that." He didn't ask anything else. Some people know when to stop asking. Those are usually the kindest ones. The bus station smelled like burnt coffee and disinfectant. I bought a bag of pretzels from a vending machine because I hadn't eaten since the night before and I could feel my hands starting to shake. $87. That's what I had. I counted it 3 times on the plastic bench, like counting might make it multiply. It did not. The bus was almost empty. I took a window seat near the back, watched the city peel away First the houses, then the strip malls, then the long green nothing of the interstate. Farms. Silos. Cows standing perfectly still in wet fields. I opened the envelope. Inside was the deed. A lawyer's letter on thick cream paper. And a small photograph, black and white, of a man I did not know. He was standing in front of a barn, no, a workshop, I could see now, and he had his arm around a woman with dark hair. They were both smiling. The kind of smile people don't do for cameras anymore. Real. Unguarded. I turned the photograph over. Sam and Winifred, 1980. Sam. My grandfather's name was Sam. And my mother had never once, in 17 years, told me that. I pressed the photograph flat against my knee and stared at it until the road blurred. The bus wound up through the hills as the sun started to set. The land changed, gentler now, greener, thick with pine and maple. I saw covered bridges, church steeples poking up between the trees, a boy on a bicycle waving at something I couldn't see. It was beautiful. That surprised me. I had expected the place I was being sent to feel like punishment, like the edge of the world. But Vermont in late July looked like a photograph from a calendar my mother used to hang in the kitchen. She loved that calendar. She'd flip it slowly each month and say, "Someday, Iris. Someday we'll go somewhere quiet like this." We never did. She never did. The bus stopped in front of a small brick building with a hand-painted sign that said Hollow Ridge. I stepped down. The driver handed me my duffel bag without a word. The doors hissed shut behind me. The bus pulled away. And then I was alone on a sidewalk in a town I had never heard of, in a state I had never been to, on the birthday no one had remembered. The air was cool. It smelled like pine and something warm and yeasty. Bread, maybe. Someone was baking somewhere. I looked up. The sky above Hollow Ridge was the deepest blue I had ever seen. Main Street was 2 blocks long. A white church, with a tall steeple at one end. A gas station at the other. In between, a diner with pink neon in the window, a hardware store, with old tools hanging in a display, a post office, a little library, and a bakery, with warm yellow light spilling onto the sidewalk. The bakery was called Fairhaven's. I don't know why I walked toward it. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't cold. I had a map on my phone that said the workshop was 7 minutes away on foot. But my legs walked me to the bakery. The bell over the door rang. The woman behind the counter looked up. She was in her late 60s. Silver hair pinned back loosely. Flower on the front of her blue apron. A face that had lived in, the kind of face where you could see every laugh and every worry, and none of them had made her hard. She looked at me. She stopped. Her hand went slowly to her mouth. "Oh," she said, softly, almost to herself. "Oh, sweetheart. I'm sorry," I said. "I think I have the wrong. You have your grandmother's eyes." I froze. She came around the counter. Slow. Careful. Like she was worried I might run. "You're Elena's girl." I could not speak. "I've been watching that door for 17 years, honey." She was crying now. Softly, wiping her cheek with the corner of her apron, and laughing a little at herself for it. "I'm Odette. Odette Fairhaven. Your grandmother was my dearest friend in this world." My grandmother, the one who had died before I was born. The one my mother had never talked about. The one whose name, Winifred, according to the back of the photograph in my pocket, I had learned less than 3 hours ago. "I don't understand," I said. "You don't have to. Not yet." Odette wiped her hands on her apron. "Are you hungry?" "No." "Yes, you are." she smiled. Come sit down. I'll get you some soup. And that's how the first person in Hollow Ridge saw me. Not as a burden. Not as a stranger. As a girl with her grandmother's eyes, expected for 17 years. The soup was chicken and rice. Thick slices of carrot, and a whole bay leaf floating on top. Odette put a piece of buttered bread on the side of the bowl, and sat down across from me, and did not ask a single question while I ate. I did not know I was that hungry until the bowl was empty. More? No. Thank you. You have somewhere to stay tonight? I hesitated. There's a workshop, I said, on Miller Lane. My grandfather's. I have the key. Odette's face did something complicated. Grief and hope, and something like fear all at once. The Whitmore workshop. Yes. Honey, she said, very gently. That place has been locked up since 1981. There's no electricity. No water. It's not fit for a girl your age to sleep in. I don't have anywhere else. She looked at me for a long moment. You have somewhere else now. She stood up. She went to a hook by the door and took down a small brass key. There's a room upstairs. Belonged to my daughter before she married and moved to Boston. It's just sitting empty. You'll stay in it tonight. Tomorrow you can go see the workshop. In the daylight. When you're not exhausted and about to fall over on my clean floor. I opened my mouth. I don't know what I was going to say. Something proud, probably. Something stupid. But what came out was, why are you being so kind to me? Odette Fairhaven looked at me across her little bakery in a town I had never been to on the worst birthday of my life. Because your grandmother loved you before you were born, she said. And I loved her. So I've been loving you too. Been practicing for a long time. My eyes burned then. I turned my face into my hands and let it come. The room upstairs was small and clean and had a window that looked out over Main Street. Odette brought me a stack of folded towels, a nightgown that was too big, and a glass of water. She stood in the doorway for a moment. I'll be downstairs early. Bread has to be in by 4. You sleep as long as you need. Odette. Yes, honey. What was he like? My grandfather. She smiled. The kind of smile you save for people you loved a long time ago and lost. He was the smartest man I ever knew. And the gentlest. He built things. Beautiful things. She paused. But that's a story for tomorrow. Tonight you just sleep. She closed the door softly. I lay in a stranger's bed in a stranger's town in a stranger's nightgown and stared at the ceiling until the light outside faded to purple, then to black. I thought about my mother. I thought about how many times she had held me and said, "You are all I have, Iris. You and me. Just us." But it was never just us. There had been a whole other world. A grandmother. A grandfather. A town. A friend named Odette, who had been loving me from a distance for 17 years. Why did you lie to me, Mom? Why? I fell asleep with my hand on the iron key. I woke to the smell of bread. Sunlight was coming through the window in long yellow bars. Somewhere below me a mixer was running. A radio was playing something soft. I could hear Odette humming. I dressed. I went downstairs. Odette handed me a coffee and a warm cinnamon roll without asking and pointed at a stool by the counter. Eat. Then we walk. Walk where? Where you were going last night. Miller Lane was on the edge of town. Odette walked slowly, one hand on my elbow, like she was afraid I might vanish. The road turned to gravel. The trees closed in overhead. Cicadas buzzed in the summer grass. And then I saw it. The workshop stood back from the road, half swallowed by ivy and wild rose. Dark wood. Steep tin roof, gone to rust. Windows boarded from the inside. A sliding barn door, and a smaller side door. Both chained shut. The padlock on the smaller door was the size of my fist, and looked like it had been forged in another century. "Oh, Sam," Odette whispered. She was looking at the workshop the way you look at a coffin. "He loved this place," she said. "You wouldn't believe how much life there was in it once. He'd have music playing. He'd have your grandmother in here bringing him lemonade in the summer." "And your mother? Your mother learned to walk on that porch." I turned to her. "My mother was here?" "Iris." Odette's voice was very soft. "Your mother grew up here. In Hollow Ridge. She lived here until she was 15. I felt the ground tilt. 15 years. My mother had lived in this town for 15 years and had never once told me. Not the name. Not the church steeple. Not the bakery. Not Odette. Not her father's name. "I need to go inside," I said. "I know. Alone." Odette hesitated. Then she nodded. "I'll be at the bakery. You come find me when you're ready. Doesn't matter what time." She squeezed my hand. She walked away. I climbed the 3 sagging steps to the porch. My heart was doing something strange. Not fear. Not exactly. Something bigger than fear. I took the iron key out of my pocket. It looked so small in my palm. Just a piece of dark metal with an ornate head, cold from the morning air. 45 years old. Older than my mother had been when she died. I slid it into the padlock. It stuck. I pulled it back. Blew on it. Tried again. It caught halfway. I jiggled it. Twisted. Nothing. "Come on. Come on, Grandpa. Let me in." I pressed harder. The key bit into my palm. My hand was shaking now. And then, a groan. Deep. Like a bone shifting inside old wood. The lock turned. The shackle popped open with a soft breathing sound, like the padlock had been holding its breath for 45 years, and finally let go. The chain slid off. Hit the porch with a heavy metal clatter. I put my shoulder against the door. I pushed. It didn't move. I pushed harder. Slipping on the mossy wood. My duffel bag falling off my shoulder. Sweat starting on my forehead even in the cool morning. "Come on." I stepped back. I took a breath. I ran at it. The door gave way with a splintering crack, and I stumbled forward into the dark. Into the smell. That's what I remember most. Not the sight. Not the size of it. The smell. Old wood. Machine oil. Sawdust. Something faintly sharp and metallic. And under all of it, something warmer, something almost like paper, like books, like a library that hadn't been opened in a long, long time. The smell of a mind that had lived in a room. My eyes adjusted slowly. Light was coming in, through the open door behind me, and through thin cracks in the boarded windows, cutting the darkness into pale gold bars full of drifting dust. The workshop was enormous. The ceiling soared up 30 feet, crisscrossed with heavy beams. A long workbench ran along the left wall. I could see the shapes of tools hanging above it, hammers and wrenches, and things I didn't have names for. On the right, huge machines stood draped in canvas. Sleeping giants. Everything was covered in a soft gray blanket of dust. Everything. I took a step forward. My boot crunched on something. Dead leaves, blown in over decades. I walked slowly down the center of the workshop. My footprints made dark tracks in the dust. I felt like I was walking through a photograph. Like the room itself was holding its breath, deciding whether to let me stay. I ran my finger along the workbench. The dust came away thick and gray. Underneath, the wood was smooth, dark, polished by decades of my grandfather's hands. I could almost see him. I could almost hear him. There were jars on shelves above the bench. Hundreds of them. Every one labeled in small, precise handwriting. Screws, bolts, washers, bushings, all sorted by size. An orderly mind. A patient mind. The kind of mind that plants a seed and waits. I don't know why I said it out loud, but I did. "Hi, Grandpa." The dust motes turned in the sunlight. Nothing answered, but something felt like it was listening. At the back of the workshop was a small enclosed room. An office. The door had a frosted glass window, the kind you see in old detective movies. Widmore Engineering was painted across it in gold, chipped and faded. The door was slightly open. I pushed it. The office was smaller than I expected. Warmer somehow. A big oak desk. A drafting table by the window, tilted, with a yellowed sheet of paper still tacked to its surface. Bookshelves floor to ceiling. A swivel chair behind the desk, angled slightly, as if someone had just stood up. On the desk, a photograph, face down. I lifted it. Wiped the dust off the glass with my sleeve. The same photograph as the one in my envelope. Sam and Winifred. 1980. Standing in front of this workshop. Smiling. But bigger. Framed. Loved. I set it upright on the desk. I turned it to face the chair, where he would have seen it every day he worked. Then I saw the envelope. It was tucked halfway under the desk blotter. Cream paper, thick, edges gone slightly soft with age. On the front, in that same precise handwriting, from the jar labels, for the grandchild who finds their way here. Not Iris. Not by name. Because he could not have known my name. He had only known someone would come. My hands were shaking as I slid it out. The seal was still intact. A small circle of dark red wax, with a stylized W pressed into it. I broke it. The paper inside was thick and dry and had held its ink perfectly. Dark blue. Fountain pen. My dear child, if you are reading this letter, then a great deal of time has passed, and I am no longer alive to greet you. I hope this workshop has found you at an hour when you needed it most. I know how it must look. Old machines. Dust. A locked room full of another man's silence. To most people, it would look like a burden. I pray you have the wisdom to see it for what it truly is. A beginning. My name is Samuel Widmore. I was your grandfather. I loved your grandmother more than I have ever known how to say, and I loved our daughter Elena the same way, and I have loved you, whoever you are, whatever name you carry, from the moment I began to hope you might one day exist. I have to sit down for the next part, because it is very difficult to write. I was an engineer. I worked, most of my life, on small useful things. Better pumps, sturdier braces, machines that made people's lives a little easier. But in the last few years of my working life, I began to build something larger. A water filtration system. Simple, cheap, small enough to fit in the back of a farm truck. Powered by very little electricity, the kind of electricity that could come from a hand crank or a bicycle wheel or the sun. It could take contaminated water and make it safe to drink. It worked in the desert. It worked in flooded villages. It worked anywhere. I truly thought, that it could save millions of lives. I sank into the chair. The old leather sighed under my weight. A soft exhale like the workshop itself was speaking to me. I kept reading. I was not naive. I knew the men who controlled the world's water would not want such a thing to exist. Their business is scarcity. They sell what people cannot live without. A machine that any village could build and repair without them, that machine is the end of their empire. I did not think they would act as quickly as they did. Men came to our home, my dear one. They did not raise their voices. They did not need to. They told me they knew where Elena went to school. They told me they knew the color of Winifred's car. They told me that if I ever spoke of the machine, or built another, or told a single soul what I had made, my family would not survive the year. I was terrified. Not for myself. For them. So I made a choice. I sealed the workshop. I told the town I had failed. I told your grandmother's friends that I was a broken man who had chased impossible dreams and lost. I let the story be the story of a foolish inventor who ran out of luck. It was not the truth. The truth was, I was trying to keep my family alive. We moved to a small house on the other side of the county. I never built anything again. Not really. I fixed clocks for a living, and I was very good at it, but I never touched the work I had loved. Your grandmother understood. She was the bravest person I ever knew. She held my hand every night for the rest of our lives, and never once made me feel small for the choice I had made. Your mother was too young to understand. She only knew her father had been a man with big dreams who quit and moved his family to a quieter place and never explained why. I think she grew up believing I was a coward. I never had the courage to tell her the truth while I was alive. That is my greatest regret. I stopped reading. I could not see the words anymore. I put my face in my hands, and I let the whole morning break open at once. My mother thought her father was a coward. My mother had grown up in a house full of a silence she never understood. My mother had gone through her entire life believing the stories Sam Whitmore had spent his life protecting her with. She had never known. She had never known. I do not know how long I sat there in the dusty office. Long enough for the sunlight on the floor to shift. Long enough for my throat to hurt. When I could see again, I picked up the letter. I have left everything here, my dear one. Everything. The plans. The journals. A working prototype, hidden safely. Enough money to give you time to think. And the truth, the whole truth about who I was, and what I built, and why I chose silence. I sealed this place not to bury my work, but to save it. For a kinder season. For a braver soul. Perhaps that soul is you. Perhaps it is not. I would not blame you if it were not. The world outside this workshop is a hard world, and you owe me nothing. If you wish to take the money, close the door behind you, and never look back. I will understand. I would love you no less. I love you now, whoever you are. But if you should choose to stay, under the loose floorboard beneath the drafting table, you will find a small steel safe. The combination is your grandmother's birthday. August 4th, 1948. 080448. Inside is everything I could not say in this letter. Inside is the beginning of the rest of the story. Be careful. If the men who threaten me are still in this world, they are patient men, and they will not have forgotten. They may still be watching this door. But this is your inheritance, my dear child. Not a burden. A choice. Whatever you decide, know this: I loved you before I knew your face. I hoped for you before you had a name. And I am so glad you came. Your grandfather, Samuel Whitmore. I sat very still. The workshop was very quiet. Outside a bird was singing somewhere in the pines. I stood up. I walked to the drafting table. I knelt down on the dusty floor. And I began to feel along the boards for the loose one. I found it near the back leg of the table. It lifted easily, as if it had been designed to. Beneath it, set into the joists, was a small black safe with a brass dial. My hands were steady now. Right to 8. Left past 8 to 4. Right to 48. Click. I opened it. Inside were 3 leather-bound journals, worn soft. A stack of banded cash, almost $15,000, I would later learn. A strange, beautiful device the size of a loaf of bread, made of copper coils and dark polished stone. And on the very top, a smaller notebook. Blue cloth cover. I knew that notebook. I had seen it 1,000 times in my mother's hands. On the kitchen table. In her lap by the window. Pressed against her chest the night she told me she was sick. It was hers. My mother's notebook. Inside the safe her father had built, 45 years before I was born. Which meant she had been here. She had opened this safe. She had put her own notebook inside. She had known. She had known everything. My whole life. She had known. I lifted the notebook out, with hands that had started to shake again. I opened it to the first page. Her handwriting. My mother's handwriting. Rounder than her father's, softer, but the same care with the letters. The same tenderness. If you are reading this, my darling girl, then I did not have the courage to tell you myself. And I am so sorry. I closed the notebook. I could not read it. Not yet. I held it against my chest, in the dust, and the sunlight, and the long-held silence of my grandfather's workshop, and I whispered the only thing I could think of to the empty air. "Okay, Mom. Okay. I'm here." Outside, somewhere down the gravel road, I could hear the distant sound of the bakery bell, and the wind moving through the pines, and Hollow Ridge going about its quiet morning, without knowing that a door had just opened that had been closed for 45 years. I did not know yet about the man in the black car, who would come 3 months later with his cold smile and his cold offer. I did not know yet about the mother I would meet, page by page, in the pages of that little blue notebook. I did not know yet about the woman across the street at the bakery, or the minister at the white church, or the truth about my mother's car accident, or the reason my stepfather had really put me on that bus. I did not know yet that Hollow Ridge had been waiting for me my entire life. All I knew that first afternoon in the workshop was this: I was not going home. Because I was already there. 3 months. That's how long it took me to fall in love with Hollow Ridge. Not the romantic kind of love. The other kind. The kind where you wake up one morning and realize the smell of a place has become the smell of home. Where the bell above a bakery door starts to sound like your own name being called. By October, I knew the town. I knew that Silas Broward opened the hardware store at exactly 6:15 every morning and drank exactly 2 cups of black coffee before he'd speak to a human being. I knew that Odette baked the cinnamon rolls on Tuesdays and the sourdough on Fridays. I knew that Winnie Thornberry, the minister's wife, took a walk every evening at 4, no matter the weather, and always waved at me through the workshop window if she saw me bent over the bench. I knew the way the light came through the maples on Miller Lane in the late afternoon. I knew the sound the old barn door made when I slid it open in the morning. I knew, for the first time in my life, what it meant to belong somewhere. I had also, by October, learned to weld. Silas taught me. He wasn't a patient man. He wasn't an impatient man either. He was something more precise, a man who assumed you were capable and got quietly disappointed if you proved him wrong, and quietly pleased if you did not. Hold it like a pencil. It's a torch, Silas. Hold it like a pencil. I held it like a pencil. The first bead I laid down looked like a caterpillar that had been hit by a car. The second one looked like a caterpillar that had been hit by 2 cars. By the 20th, it looked like a bead. Silas grunted, which, from Silas, was the same as applause. "Your grandfather," he said, wiping his hands on his shop rag. "He could weld a coin to a dime, and you couldn't see the seam. I don't know what that means." "Means he was very good." "Oh." Silas looked at me sideways. He was in his early 70s, broad-shouldered, with hands the color and texture of old leather. "You've got his hands," he said. I did not know what to say to that. So I said, "Thank you." And he said, "Wasn't a compliment. Was a fact," which somehow felt like the biggest compliment I had ever received. I learned to read the schematics at night. Odette let me stay in the apartment upstairs from the bakery. She refused rent. She would not even discuss it. When I tried to press money into her hand, money from my grandfather's safe, she pushed it back so gently I felt like I was being rebuked by a saint. "Your family, Iris. Family doesn't pay for a bed." I'm not really. Don't finish that sentence, honey. So I didn't. I ate breakfast in the bakery. I ate dinner with the Thornberrys at the little parsonage behind the church more nights than not. Winnie would set out 3 plates without asking, and Elias would say grace, and I would sit at their table and feel my shoulders come down from around my ears for the first time all day. Winnie had a way of looking at me sometimes, across the table, over a bowl of stew, when she thought I wasn't watching. The way you look at a photograph you can't quite believe is real. I noticed it. I didn't understand it. I told myself it was nothing, which was a mistake. I was reading my grandfather's journal slowly, on purpose. 1 page a night, sometimes 2. I did not want to run out of him. He wrote about physics, about water pressure, about the moment he first understood that filtration could be simplified, not made more complex, but simpler, always simpler, until any village could build the machine from scrap and a bicycle. He wrote about my grandmother. She brought me tea again today. She does not like the workshop. She says the sawdust gets in her hair. But she comes in every afternoon at 3 anyway. She sits on the stool by the drafting table, and she asks me what I am building, and she listens, as if it matters. Everything matters when she listens. He wrote about my mother. Elena took her first steps today on the porch. She fell. She stood up. She fell again. She looked at me, and she was not crying, she was thinking. She was thinking about the fall. Then she stood up a 3rd time, and did not fall. I have never been prouder of anything in my life. I read that paragraph 3 times. I closed the journal. I turned out the lamp. I lay in the dark in the apartment above Odette's bakery, and I whispered, "Hi, Mom." I did not read my mother's blue notebook. I could not yet. It sat on my nightstand every night. I would put my hand on it before I slept. Sometimes I would open the cover and look at the first line, "If you are reading this, my darling girl," and then close it again. I was afraid. I did not know what she was going to tell me. I did not know if I was ready to know. So the notebook waited. It was very patient. She had been very patient too. It was a Wednesday in the 3rd week of October. I remember because Odette had made pumpkin loaves that morning, and the whole bakery smelled like cinnamon and clove, and the leaves outside had gone, that violent shocking orange that only happens in New England. I was in the workshop by 8. I was working on the prototype. I had gotten one of the smaller sub-assemblies functioning, the pre-filter stage, the part that stripped out sediment before the water hit the main system. Dirty water went in one end that morning and clear water came out the other, and I sat on the floor of the workshop and stared at it like it was a newborn baby. I heard the car. Most cars didn't come down Miller Lane. It was a dead-end gravel road, with one building on it, mine. I stood up, wiped my hands on my jeans, walked to the door. A black car was pulling up the drive. Long polished, expensive, the kind of car you don't see in a town like Hollow Ridge, unless something has gone wrong. The driver's door opened. A man got out. He was tall, late 50s, silver hair combed straight back, a charcoal suit that cost more than I had ever seen a person wear. He smiled at me across the gravel. The smile did not reach his eyes. "Iris Callahan?" "Yes. My name is Roderick Vance. I represent Ashcroft Industries. I wonder if I could have a moment of your time." I did not move. Something in my body knew this man before my mind did. Something in my grandfather's journals, a paragraph I had read a week ago and pushed away, was whispering. Men came to our home. They did not raise their voices. They did not need to. "What do you want?" I said. Roderick Vance's smile widened by a millimeter. "May I come in?" "No." He did not react. He simply nodded, as if my rudeness were a small note he was tucking into a file for later. "That's quite all right. I'll be brief." He took a slow step forward. Just one. But it was closer than I wanted him. "My company has been interested in this property for some time. Historic value. Beautiful land. We'd like to build a small research facility here. We're prepared to offer you very fair terms." He named a number. It was less than the workshop was worth. Much less. The land alone was worth more. The machines inside, the tools, the lathes, the drill press, the copper stock in the back, were worth more than the number he had just said. I did not respond. "I understand this must feel sudden," Roderick Vance said. "You are very young. This is a lot of building for one person to manage. Property taxes, upkeep, insurance, these things add up quickly. A girl your age should not have to bear that alone." "I'm not alone. Aren't you?" He was still smiling. I felt the hair on my arm stand up. "You should think about it," he said. "Take a few days. Talk it over with, well, whomever you have to talk to." He turned as if to go. Then he turned back. Casual, almost an afterthought. "You know," he said, "your grandfather was a stubborn man. He couldn't see the bigger picture. And your grandmother, well, she could have had a very long life if he'd been more reasonable." The world stopped. I did not breathe. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you don't." Roderick Vance smiled with all his teeth. "You're only 17. What could you possibly know?" He got back in his black car. He drove away. I stood on the porch of my grandfather's workshop for a very long time, after the gravel dust had settled. My hands were shaking. My legs were shaking. I sat down on the top step, because I did not trust myself to stand. She could have had a very long life. He was talking about my grandmother. He was telling me, smiling, standing in my grandfather's driveway, that my grandmother's death had not been what everyone believed. I put my head between my knees. I got angry instead of afraid. Because anger, it turns out, is easier than terror. Anger is a thing you can use. I ran to the bakery. I burst through the door. The bell clanged. Odette looked up from the counter with a smile that fell off her face the instant she saw mine. "Iris, he was here." "Who?" "A man. Ashcroft Industries. Roderick Vance." The color left Odette's face. She sat down. Just sat. Right there on the flour-dusted stool behind the counter. Like her legs had stopped working. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh honey." He said things. About my grandmother. Iris, sit down. He said she could have had a longer life. Sit down, sweetheart. I sat. Odette reached across the counter and took both of my hands. Her hands were dry and warm and covered in flour, and I have never, in my life, held anything that steadied me faster. I need you to listen to me, she said. Okay. That family, she whispered. That company has been sending men to that workshop for 45 years. Who are they? Ashcroft Industries owns almost every private water utility in the Northeast. They have contracts with municipalities from Maine to Virginia. They set the price. Nobody argues because there's nobody else. Your grandfather's machine would have ended them. Then why aren't they still afraid? He's been dead for 40 years. Because he's been dead, Odette said quietly. The machine died with him. Or so they thought. Until a 17-year-old girl showed up at Miller Lane with the key in her pocket. Silence. The bakery smelled like pumpkin. I said, what do I do? Odette looked at me. You call the lawyer. The lawyer's name was Callum Bridger. He was 32 years old. He had inherited his father's practice in a small city 40 minutes south of Hollow Ridge. His father had been my grandfather's best friend. I called him from the bakery phone. I said my name. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Callum Bridger said, very softly, Miss Callahan, I have been waiting for you my entire adult life. He was at the workshop in an hour and a half. He was tall and rumpled and had a bad haircut. He carried a leather briefcase that looked like it had been his father's, and probably his grandfather's before that. He walked into the office. He looked at my grandfather's desk. He put a hand on the back of the swivel chair, and I saw him swallow hard. My father used to bring me here when I was a boy, he said. Your grandfather would let me climb on the lathe. My mother was horrified. I'm sorry I didn't know you existed. I'm sorry you didn't either. He set his briefcase down. He opened it. Inside was a manila folder as thick as a Bible. My father held this in trust for a lifetime, Callum Bridger said. He gave it to me on his deathbed. He said, one day, a Whitmore or a Callahan is going to walk through your door. You give them this. You help them. You do not ask questions. He set the folder on the desk. Everything's in there, Iris. Everything Sam gathered before he sealed the workshop. Recordings, photographs, names of the men who came to your family's house, a list of every threat dated, and this is the important part, a historic preservation covenant your grandfather secretly filed on this land in 1978. What does that mean? It means Ashcroft cannot buy this property. They cannot seize it. They cannot condemn it. Not without a decade of federal litigation. Your grandfather designed the paperwork to survive. He knew they would come back. He built you a fortress. I stared at the folder. I stared at the young man holding it. I said, why are they still doing this? He's been dead for 40 years. Callum Bridger did not smile. Because the machine is bigger than one man, Miss Callahan. Ashcroft doesn't care about Sam. They never did. They cared about the machine. And now the machine has a granddaughter. October turned into November. I rebuilt the prototype in the workshop, piece by piece. The main filter, the pump, the pressure regulator, the little copper coil that acted as a resonance chamber, my grandfather's most beautiful piece of engineering, a small elegant thing that made the whole system possible with almost no electricity at all. Silas found me parts. He drove 3 hours to Burlington to find a specific gauge of copper tubing. Odette fed me. Winnie brought me clean sweaters when the workshop got cold, and I forgot to bring one. Elias, the minister, came by sometimes just to sit in the office and drink coffee with me. He didn't preach. He didn't lecture. He just sat there in the swivel chair that had been my grandfather's, and he listened when I talked. Sometimes I would look at him and catch a look on his face that I could not read. Grief. Guilt. Something else. I told myself I was imagining it. The first night the machine ran, I was alone. November 8th. Cold. Frost on the workshop windows. My breath making little clouds even inside, because the potbelly stove I'd rigged in the corner was working overtime and losing. The prototype sat on the workbench, connected to a small 12-volt battery. I had a 5-gallon bucket of muddy pond water at the input, an empty glass jar at the output. My hand was trembling, so hard I could barely flip the switch. I flipped it. The pump hummed. The muddy water slugged through the intake, disappeared into the housing, and nothing came out the other end. For 6 seconds, I stopped breathing. 7, 8, 9. A single clear drop trembled at the output. Then another. Then a slow, steady, silvery thread of water, perfectly clear, no cloud, no color, no smell, began to fall into the jar. I sat down on the floor. I did not sit. My knees stopped working, and I ended up on the concrete floor of my grandfather's workshop, with my back against the workbench and my face in my hands. I did not sob. I laughed. I laughed the way you laugh, when something has been holding you together too tightly for too long, and it finally lets go. I laughed until the laughter turned into tears. I whispered to the empty rafters of the sleeping workshop, "Grandpa, I did it! We did it!" The jar filled slowly. I let the machine run for 20 minutes. It never faltered. Not once. When I turned it off, I took the jar in both hands, and I walked, very carefully, out into the November night. My breath ghosted in the air. The stars over Hollow Ridge were sharp as broken glass. I walked all the way to the parsonage behind the church. I knocked on the Thornberry's door. Winnie opened it in her bathrobe. I held up the jar. I said, "Look." Winnie looked at the jar. She looked at my face. She started to weep. She took the jar from my hands very gently and set it on the hall table, and then she wrapped her arms around me and held me the way I had not been held since my mother died, and she said, into my hair, "Oh, sweet girl. He would be so proud of you. He'd be so proud." I slept in the workshop that night. I did not want to leave the machine alone. I wrapped myself in an old wool blanket on the cot I had set up in the office. I could see the prototype from where I lay, just its silhouette in the dark. I fell asleep smiling. I woke to the sound of glass breaking. 3 in the morning. The workshop was pitch dark. For a second I thought I had dreamed it. Then I heard footsteps. Inside the workshop. Someone was walking on the concrete floor. Slowly. Carefully. Not trying to be silent, trying to be heard. I could not move. I lay under the wool blanket on the cot in my grandfather's office, and I listened to the footsteps come closer. They stopped. They started again. They moved away. I heard the barn door slide. I heard a car engine start somewhere down the gravel road. I heard the car drive away. Then silence. I did not move for a long, long time. When the gray of dawn finally started to seep through the office window, I got up. My legs were shaking. I walked out into the main workshop. The prototype was gone. Not the main housing. Not the pump. Just the drawings. The full schematics. The blueprints I had spread out on the workbench the night before, weighing them down with a copper resonance coil. The originals in my grandfather's own hand. Gone. The window on the east side of the workshop was broken. Not shattered, cut. Neatly. Professionally. The pane lifted out and set carefully on the ground beside the wall, so that no glass would crunch under the intruder's feet. I stood in the middle of the workshop, with my hands trembling. I whispered, "No!" I whispered, "No, no, 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 no!" I ran to the office. I checked the safe. The safe was locked. Untouched. The safe still held the journals, the money, my mother's blue notebook. But the drawings. They had taken the drawings. Ashcroft had the drawings. I sank down against the workshop wall, and I put my face in my hands, and I did not know what to do. I sat there until the light came all the way up. I sat there until I heard footsteps on the gravel outside. Slow. Familiar. Elias Thornberry came through the open barn door. He was wearing his black minister's shirt. His eyes were red. He crossed the workshop floor, and he stopped in front of me, and he sank down onto the concrete beside me like a man who has finally set down a weight he could not carry another step. "Elias, I have to tell you something, Iris. Now is not. Now is the only time." He put his hands over his face. "Your mother did not die in a car accident." The workshop was very quiet. I said, "What?" "Elena was driving to Boston. She had a folder in the passenger seat. She had made copies of your grandfather's work. She was going to take it to the Globe. She was going to publish everything. Names, threats, the machine. All of it." He was not looking at me. He was looking at the concrete floor. "She stopped in Hollow Ridge that morning. She came to see me. She said, 'Elias, if anything happens to me, I need you to keep this safe.' She left a copy of the folder with me. The original stayed with her." He took a breath. "She got back on the highway. 20 miles south of here, on that long downhill grade near Elmore Pass. Her brakes failed. I could not breathe. The state police said it was a maintenance issue. They said the car was old. They said accidents happen. But Ashcroft had a man in Hollow Ridge that week, Iris. A man who spent an afternoon at the gas station where your mother had left her car. How do you know that?" "Because I saw him." Elias's voice broke. "I saw him, Iris. I saw him at the gas station. I saw him under her car. And I did not say anything. I did not go to the police. I did not tell anyone. Because 2 days after your mother died, another man came to the parsonage. He knew Winnie's name. He knew her medical history. He said if I ever spoke a word about Elena, my wife would not survive another year. He was weeping now. I chose Winnie. God forgive me. I chose Winnie. I have carried this for almost 10 years, and I could not carry it another day, and I am so sorry, Iris, I am so." I did not speak. I could not speak. My mother had been driving to Boston. My mother had been trying to tell the world. My mother had been trying to finish her father's work. And my mother had been killed for it. And a man who loved her, a man who had held her as a baby, a man who had baptized her, had watched it happen and stayed silent to save the woman he loved. I did not have room in my chest for what I was feeling. I stood up. I walked out of the workshop. I walked past Elias without looking at him. I walked down Miller Lane in the cold November morning, with no coat on, and I did not stop walking until I reached the little cemetery behind the church. My mother's grave was in the back corner, under a maple that had shed all its leaves. Elena Whitmore Callahan. Beloved daughter. Beloved mother. 1975 to 2017. I knelt in the frozen grass. I put both hands flat on the cold stone. What I felt was bigger than tears. It was a slow, hot, steady thing rising from the base of my spine to the crown of my head. It was resolve. "Mama!" I whispered it. "Mama! I know now. I know everything. I know why you never told me. I know why you kept me away. I know you were trying to protect me." I took a long, shaking breath. "But I am not going to be quiet. I am not going to be quiet the way you had to be quiet. I am going to finish what he started. And what you tried to finish. I am going to tell the world." The wind moved through the empty branches of the maple above me. The sun was coming up over the church steeple. I stood up. I walked back to the workshop. Elias was still sitting on the concrete floor, where I had left him. Odette was there now. Winnie was there. Silas was there. Callum Bridger was there in his rumpled coat, breathless, like he had driven up from the city at 80 miles an hour. They all looked up when I came in. I said, "They took the drawings." Odette said, "We know. Elias called us." I said, "It doesn't matter." Callum said, "Iris." I said, "It doesn't matter. They can have those drawings." Because we are not going to sell this machine. We are not going to patent this machine. We are not going to license this machine to anyone. I looked around at them, at the 4 older people and the young lawyer who had loved my mother and my grandmother and my grandfather, who had waited for me, who had chosen me. I said, "We are going to give it to the world for free. We are going to put every schematic, every journal, every piece of evidence Callum's father has been holding for 45 years up on the internet, where no one can bury it, where no one can steal it, where every village and every desert on this planet can build one for the cost of scrap and a bicycle." I looked at Callum Bridger. I said, "Can we do that?" Callum Bridger looked at me for a long moment. Then he smiled. It was a slow, terrible, wonderful smile. He said, "Miss Callahan, that is exactly what my father wanted me to help someone do. For 45 years. Odette put her hand over her mouth. Winnie was weeping softly. Silas said, "Well, then let's get to work." I looked at all of them. I looked at my grandfather's workbench. I looked at the photograph of Sam and Winifred, still smiling from the frame on the desk. And I heard myself say, quietly, but clearly, so the workshop could hear me, "Okay, Grandpa. Let's finish it." Outside, on Miller Lane, the November wind moved through the pines. Somewhere, in a black car parked on a distant road, Roderick Vance was already dialing a number. He did not know yet what was coming for him. He did not know that a 17-year-old girl had just decided. He did not know that a whole small town in Vermont had already, quietly, taken her side. We had 2 weeks. That's what Callum Bridger said. 2 weeks before Ashcroft's stolen drawings would be turned into a patent application. 2 weeks before the machine my grandfather designed to save lives would be locked inside a corporate vault forever. 2 weeks to give it to the world first. I did not sleep much in those 2 weeks. None of us did. The workshop turned into something I still don't have a word for. Not an office. Not a war room. Something in between. Silas ran extension cords from a diesel generator he'd hauled up from the hardware store. Winnie brought a folding table from the parsonage basement. Odette showed up every morning at 6, with 3 thermoses of coffee and a tin of biscuits and a look on her face that said, "Nobody is going hungry on my watch." Callum drove up from the city every day. He was working 2 full jobs. His paying practice by day. My revolution by night. His hair got worse. I loved him for it. The plan was simple in the way that impossible things are simple. Step 1, finish the schematics. Step 2, write the guide. Step 3, put it on the internet in a way that could not be taken down. That was the whole plan. That was every waking hour for 14 days. Silas took over the machining. He built 3 more prototypes on my grandfather's old lathe, working from the copies of the drawings I had photographed on my phone the day before Ashcroft stole the originals. He made them uglier than my grandfather would have. He made them simpler. He made them out of things you could buy at any hardware store, from Maine to Mumbai. "Fancy don't help a village in a drought," he said. "Ugly works fine." Grandpa would have hated that sentence. "Your grandpa," Silas said, tightening a fitting, "was a beautiful engineer. But I have been fixing his beautiful engineering for 50 years. Trust me, ugly works fine." I laughed for the first time in a week. Winnie wrote the assembly guide. I did not know she could do that. I did not know a lot of things about Winnie Thornberry yet. She sat at the folding table, with a stack of my grandfather's journals, a legal pad, and a pair of reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She translated 40 years of engineering shorthand into plain English a 14-year-old could follow. Step by step, diagram by diagram, in language that assumed nothing and forgave everything. "Where did you learn to do this?" I asked her one night. Winnie did not look up from the page. "I used to type your grandfather's papers," she said. "A long time ago." "You worked for him?" "Something like that." "I let it go. I was getting good at letting things go. I was going to regret that too." Callum built the legal shield. He filed the schematics under the Whitmore Foundation, a non-profit he incorporated in 6 days, which he told me was legally impossible, which he did anyway. He drafted an open-source license my grandfather would have wept over. He arranged for mirror servers in 3 countries, so if one went down, the others would carry the load. He got the whole package reviewed by an intellectual property attorney in California, a college friend of his, who owed him a favor, and did the work for free after Callum told her the story. She wrote back one line. "Publish it. I've got your 6. Callum framed that email. I saw it on his desk months later. Odette fed us. I know that sounds small next to schematics, and lawsuits and mirror servers. It was not small. An army marches on its stomach, and a revolution runs on cinnamon rolls. Odette was there at dawn. She was there at midnight. She stood in the workshop, with a plate of grilled cheese for Silas, and a mug of chamomile for Winnie, and a piece of pie for Callum, and she never once, not once, asked if she could help in any other way. She knew what she was doing. She was doing everything. The night before we published, she found me alone in the office at 2 in the morning. I was sitting in my grandfather's chair, with my mother's blue notebook in my lap, still unopened. Odette sat down on the little stool by the drafting table. She looked at the notebook. She looked at me. "Are you going to read it?" "I don't know." "You should." "I know." "Not because I'm telling you to. Because whatever's in there, she wrote it for you. And you're about to change the world in the morning." She should get to be there for it. I did not answer. Odette stood up. She kissed the top of my head like I was 6 years old. She left me alone in the office. I opened the notebook. "If you are reading this, my darling girl, then I did not have the courage to tell you myself. And I am so sorry. I am writing this in the workshop. It is 2003. I am 28 years old. You do not exist yet. I don't know if you ever will. But if you do, and if life brings you here, I need you to know some things. Your grandfather was not a coward. He was the bravest man I ever knew. I did not understand that when he was alive. I thought he had given up. I thought he had chosen quiet living over great work, and I was angry at him for it my whole life. I said terrible things to him when I was 17. I told him he had wasted his mind. I told him he had wasted our family. He did not defend himself. He never did. He died 3 months after I said those things. I found out the truth 2 weeks after his funeral. Your grandmother sat me down at her kitchen table, and she told me everything. About Ashcroft. About the threats. About the men who came to the house. About the choice he made. She told me, because she was frightened for me. She said the danger had not gone away. She said Ashcroft still watched the family, and they would watch you too, if I ever had you. She made me promise I would never tell anyone what I had learned. Then she told me she was going away. I never saw her again after that summer. I do not know, my darling, whether your grandmother is still alive somewhere. I hope she is. I have prayed every night of my life that she is. She told me she had to disappear to give the men who watched us nothing to hold on to anymore. She told me it was the only way to keep the family safe. I told everyone she died in a car accident. That is the story your father heard when he met me. I told everyone because I was terrified that if I told the truth, Ashcroft would come for whoever was left. I was right to be afraid. They did come back. If you are reading this, they have come back. Because that is the only reason a Whitmore ever opens this notebook. My darling girl, I am so sorry. I am so sorry I did not tell you about your grandfather. I am so sorry I did not tell you about Hollow Ridge. I am so sorry I did not let you know Odette, or the town that would have loved you your whole life. I did it because I was trying to keep you safe. I did it because I was terrified. And I am writing this to you now from your grandfather's workshop on a summer afternoon when I am 28 and unmarried and do not yet know your face, because I know I will not always be brave enough to tell you the truth. Someday I might die and never have said it. I don't want that for you. So here is the truth in one place forever. You come from brave people. Your grandfather chose his family over his life's work. Your grandmother stood beside him for 40 years and never once let him feel small for it. And I am trying, in my own way, to be brave enough to finish what he could not. If I have succeeded, you will not need to read this letter. If you are reading it, I did not succeed. Please forgive me. And please, if you can, do what I could not. I love you already, my darling girl. Whoever you are. Whatever your name is. I love you so much it terrifies me. Your mother, Elena. I closed the notebook. I sat very still. Outside, the workshop was quiet. I heard, very faintly, the sound of Odette humming something down in the main room. I said, "Okay, Mom. Okay. I forgive you." I put the notebook down on the desk. And then I got up and I walked out into the workshop and I said to the 4 people who had barely slept for 2 weeks, "We publish tomorrow." The night before we published, my stepfather showed up. I was locking the workshop door at 9 in the evening. The gravel drive was frozen hard. My breath was white in the porch light. I had a thermos of tea in one hand and my grandfather's keys in the other, and my mind was so far away from Gerald Morris that when I heard footsteps on the gravel, I almost dropped both. He was standing at the bottom of the porch stairs, older than I remembered, which made no sense. It had only been 6 months. He was thinner. His coat was too big. His hands were shaking. He looked up at me, and I did not recognize him. Not really. This was not the man who had put me on a bus in July. This was the ghost of that man. Or maybe the truth of him. "Iris, get off my property. Iris, please. You have 5 seconds. They came to me first." I stopped. "What?" "Ashcroft. 3 years ago. They came to me first. I did not move. I owed money, Iris. A lot of money. To some very bad people. Your mother paid it off before she died. I never told you. I never told anyone. But somebody knew. And 3 years ago, a man in a suit came to my office and told me they'd cover the rest. The collectors were still after me. They wouldn't stop. They'd cover the rest if I did one thing for them. Get you out of the way. He was weeping now. They said, put her on a bus. Put her on a bus to Hollow Ridge on her 18th birthday. Make it hurt. Make sure she never wants to come back. Then when she gets there, wait. She'll find the workshop. She'll want to sell. She'll be 17 and scared and broke. She'll take any offer. All you have to do is sign the guardianship paperwork, so we can process the sale on her behalf. You put me on a bus at 17. They moved it up. I don't know why. I didn't argue. I was so tired, Iris. I was so tired of being afraid. You threw me out. I thought I was. You threw me out. I know. I could not breathe. He was weeping on the gravel drive at the bottom of my porch stairs. In his too big coat. In the cold. I said, how did you find me here? Odette. What? Odette wrote to me. 3 weeks ago. She said, Iris is well. She is doing something important. She would want to know that you know. Odette wrote to you. Yes. Why? I think, Gerald said, and his voice broke. I think because she is a better person than I have ever been. I stood on the porch for a long time. I did not know what to say. I did not know what to feel. There was a part of me that wanted to hate him, that deserved to hate him, that had earned the right to hate him. And there was a part of me, the part that had spent 2 weeks writing an assembly guide, with Winnie and machining prototypes, with Silas and being fed grilled cheese by Odette, and building a foundation, with Callum, that was too tired to hate anyone. I said, where are you staying tonight? I have a room at the motel by the highway. No, you don't. It closed last winter. Oh. Sit on the porch. What? Sit on the porch. Don't move. Don't come inside. I'm getting Odette. He sat on the porch. I drove down to the bakery. I woke Odette up. I told her Gerald was on my porch. She said, of course he is, sweetheart. Put a blanket on him, and I'll be over in 20 minutes. She came over in 20 minutes. She looked at Gerald on the porch. She said, well, you made it. He said, I made it. She said, you'll sleep at my place tonight. On the couch. Tomorrow we'll figure out the rest. He said, why are you being kind to me? Odette Fairhaven looked at my stepfather in the porch light of my grandfather's workshop at the end of a night that had already broken open too many things to count. She said, because everyone who ever came through that door was somebody who needed forgiving. And I'm running out of years to be stingy with it. Then she took Gerald home. I stood on the porch alone for a long time. I did not go back inside. I looked up at the stars over Hollow Ridge. I whispered, I am not going to forgive him tonight, Mom. But I am going to try. Someday. I am going to try. Sunday morning, Elias Thornberry preached his sermon. I have no memory of what it was about. I was sitting in the third pew from the front, with Winnie on one side of me, and Odette on the other, and Silas behind me, and Callum next to Silas, and everything the minister said washed over me like sunlight on water. At the end of the service, he did something he had never done before. He came down from the pulpit. He walked to the front pew. He said, this morning, I want to yield the last few minutes of our service to Iris Callahan. He looked at me. He held out his hand. I stood up. I walked to the front of the church. I turned and looked out at the congregation of Hollow Ridge. Maybe 120 people. Farmers, teachers, a retired firefighter, a pregnant woman I did not know. The whole town waiting. I had not prepared anything. I opened my mouth, and I told them everything. I told them about my grandfather. I told them about my grandmother. I told them about my mother on the highway, driving to Boston. I told them about Ashcroft. About Roderick Vance. About the black car. About the stolen drawings. I told them about the machine. I told them we were publishing it that afternoon. I told them I was scared. I told them I was scared, but I was not alone. When I was done, there was a silence in that church I have never heard, before or since. It was the silence of 120 people holding their breath at the same time. Then someone in the back stood up. Then someone in the middle stood up. Then Winnie stood up. Then the whole church stood up. Nobody said anything. They just stood. That is what people in a small town do when they are telling you, "We are with you. We are with you. We are with you." Elias came to the front. He put his hand on my shoulder. He said quietly, "Let us pray." He prayed a prayer I do not remember the words of. I remember the feeling. I remember being 17 years old at the front of a small white church in Vermont, with my chosen people around me, and I remember thinking, I am not alone. I have not been alone since July. I did not know it until this moment. But I have not been alone since I stepped off that bus. We published at 3 in the afternoon. Callum hit the button. The full package went live: schematics, assembly guide, journals, evidence file, video of me sitting on the workshop porch telling the story, with Silas and Odette and Winnie standing behind me. 3 mirror sites. 2 continents. 1 press release to every major news outlet in the English-speaking world. By dinner time, the first engineer in Nairobi had downloaded the plans. By midnight, a village council in rural Bangladesh had shared them. By the next morning, a non-profit in northern Kenya had built the first working copy from scrap. By the end of the week, the story was on the front page of the New York Times. Ashcroft tried to fight it. They ran smear pieces. They said I was a fraud. They said the machine did not work. They said the story was fabricated. But you cannot fight a machine that already exists in 300 garages. You cannot fight a story that a whole town in Vermont is telling to every reporter who calls. You cannot fight a granddaughter who has decided. Roderick Vance stopped calling by the 3rd week. Callum told me later that Ashcroft's board had a very bad quarter. Callum told me later that a federal investigation had been opened into the death of Elena Whitmore Callahan. Callum told me later that 4 executives resigned. But that was later. That afternoon, when Callum hit the button, I did not think about any of that. I sat on the workshop porch. I watched the November sun set over the pine trees. I felt Winnie sit down next to me on the top step. I said, "It's done." She said, "It's just starting." I said, "I know." Then she took my hand, and she said, very quietly, so quietly that I almost missed it, "Iris, there is one more thing I need to tell you." There was a small envelope in her lap. It was cream-colored, old, sealed with a small circle of dark red wax that had a stylized W pressed into it. The same seal as my grandfather's first letter. She held it out to me. She said, "Your grandfather gave this to me 3 months before he died. He made me swear I would not open it. He made me swear I would give it to his grandchild if his grandchild ever found her way home." Winnie, read it, sweetheart. I took the envelope. I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper. and a photograph. The photograph was of a baby, wrapped in a pink hospital blanket, tiny fist against her cheek, eyes closed, a hospital bracelet on her impossibly small wrist. The bracelet said Callahan Iris, my newborn photograph, which was impossible, because my grandfather had been dead for 24 years by the time I was born. I looked at Winnie. I could not speak. She was weeping. She was smiling. She was doing both at once, and her whole face had come apart with it, and she was more beautiful in that moment than any woman I have ever seen. I looked down at the paper. My darling grandchild. If you are reading this, then Winnie has kept her promise. And you have come home. I never held you. I did not live long enough. I am so sorry for that. But I did see you. Once, Winnie and I drove down to the hospital the night you were born. We did not go in. We stood on the sidewalk outside the maternity ward, and we watched the window of the nursery. A very kind nurse held you up, so we could see you through the glass. You were so small. You were so perfect. You had your mother's mouth, your grandmother's eyes. I sank into my grandfather's coat, and I wept like a child, my darling. Winnie held me. Winnie has held me through every hard thing I have ever done, and she held me that night too. She is my greatest love. She is your grandmother. And she made me one promise, standing on that sidewalk. She promised that, if I did not live to know you, she would. She promised she would find her way to you. She would wait for you. She would love you for both of us. I am writing this letter to release her from her promise. Because I am dying, my darling. The cancer has moved into my liver. I have weeks, not months. And I do not want Winnie to spend her whole life waiting for a granddaughter who might never come. Your grandmother has plans, my darling. Plans she has kept from me because she knows I would try to stop her. She intends to disappear from Ashcroft's watch after I am gone to become a new person in a new place, so that the men who threatened us for so long will lose the thread of the family. She has been braver than I have ever been. She has arranged everything. She has told me only that she will find her way to you if you ever come. She has told me only that she has a plan. So I am writing to say, Winnie, if you are reading this over her shoulder, you have done enough. You do not owe me any more. If Iris has come home, tell her the truth. Tell her who you are. Tell her that you loved her before she was born. And if she has not come home, put this envelope in the workshop safe and let it stay there. She will be loved either way by someone somewhere. That is how love works. But my darling, sweet grandchild, if you are reading this, then the woman sitting next to you, who has just handed you this letter, is your grandmother. She has been your grandmother your whole life. Please, please let her hold you. She has waited so long. Your loving grandfather forever. Samuel Whitmore. I looked up. Winnie was sitting on the porch step next to me. She was small in the November light. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her eyes were bright with tears, and she was trying not to hope, and it was breaking me, and I could not speak. I whispered, "Grandma?" Winifred Whitmore nodded. She said, "Aye, sweetheart." She said, "I have been waiting to be called that name for a very long time." I fell into her arms. I did not stand up first. I did not think about it. I just went. I ended up half on the porch and half in her lap, with my face against her shoulder and my arms around her neck, and I wept the way I had not wept since my mother died, and Winnie held me the way my mother used to hold me, the way my mother had learned to hold me from her, and she rocked me on the porch of my grandfather's workshop while the November sun set over Hollow Ridge. She kept whispering the same thing. "I have you. I have you now," she whispered. Your mother thought I was gone too, sweetheart. It was the only way to keep her safe. To keep you safe. I never forgave myself for that. Not for one day. She whispered, I watched you your whole life, Iris. From across a street. From across a church. I watched you, and I loved you, and I could not tell you. And when your mother died, I almost broke my promise. I almost came to you then. But Ashcroft was still watching. So I waited. I waited for you to come to me. She whispered, and you came. You came, sweetheart. You came. 6 months later. Spring in Vermont. The workshop is not a workshop anymore. It is the Whitmore Foundation. There is a sign above the barn door that Silas welded himself. There is a coffee corner where Odette bakes fresh bread every morning for the volunteers. There is a legal office in what used to be the small back room where Callum works 3 days a week. There is a wall in the main workspace that we have covered with a map of the world, and on the map are 241 red pins, and every pin is a village where a working filtration system has been built. 241. In 6 months. Winnie comes to the workshop every afternoon at 3. She sits at the drafting table where her husband used to sit 45 years ago, and she asks me what I am building, and she listens, as if it matters. Everything matters when she listens. I write to Gerald every 2 weeks. He is in a treatment program in Ohio. He is doing the work. He is not asking for forgiveness. He is not asking for anything. He is just writing me letters and telling me small true things about his day. I write back short letters. I do not tell him I love him. I do not know if I ever will. But I write. That is something. The last night of the story is not really the last night. There is no last night. But there is a night, in early April, when the maples on Miller Lane are just starting to bud, and I stay late at the workshop after everyone has gone home. I lock the door. I walk through the dark main room, past the sleeping machines. I go into the office. I sit down in my grandfather's chair. The photograph of Sam and Winifred is on the desk. The photograph of me, as a newborn, is next to it. My mother's blue notebook is on the shelf. I turn on the little green desk lamp, and I say, out loud, to the quiet room, Hi, Grandpa. Hi, Mom. The water is running. The water is running in 241 places tonight because of you. And I am not alone. I have never been alone. Thank you. Outside, the wind moves through the pines on Miller Lane. Inside, the little green desk lamp glows. And somewhere in the dark, in a village outside Nairobi, in a hillside town in Guatemala, in a refugee camp on the border of Sudan, in a farmhouse in northern India, a small, ugly, beautiful machine that a man in Vermont designed 45 years ago is quietly, patiently doing its work. Water going in. Clean water coming out. A grandfather's promise, kept by a granddaughter he never held. A mother's courage, finished by a daughter she left behind. A grandmother's 17-year vigil, rewarded with a girl asleep in her arms on a Vermont porch. A whole small town in Vermont that opened its door to a stranger and turned her into a daughter. And a 17-year-old girl who got on a bus on the worst morning of her life and stepped off it into the family she was always supposed to have. Some inheritances look like a burden. Some look like a rusted key and a locked door. Some look like the end of everything. But if you have the courage to turn the key, sometimes, you find that what was waiting inside was not the end. It was the beginning. It was home.